Portland Police Union leader calls city a cesspool, slamming the mayor's response to homelessness. I'm Alex Ansary. It is July 17th in the year 2018. We're talking about my hometown. Looking at Portland from Colorado is a lot easier than looking at Portland and living there. And I fell on my own hard times, and I've talked about that in other videos, so I have like a unique perspective to the Portland, Oregon experience. I've actually seen this individual before in videos. There's been a lot of protests this person has had to deal with. Right, Portland is a interesting place. I feel that it gets a bad rap these days because of the homelessness and because of the protests. I'm just going to start out by saying that there's a lot of good things that a city like Portland has produced over the years, right? Sometimes cities, though, they have their cycles. And sometimes, right, too much of a good thing can attract a lot of problems. But when you're dealing with a city, and I'm just going to give a brief introduction and then just start reading, that becomes very popular in a short period of time, all of a sudden you have more people that are homeless that aren't your typical drug addict, traveling hobos. You have a situation now where there are people that are from Portland that have had careers, that have had jobs, people that I've known that have resorted to living out of their vehicles in recent years because of the explosion in the cost of rent. So keep that in mind as we look at this story. So Daryl Turner, the president of the Portland Police Association, defended officers' interactions with homeless people, slammed Mayor Ted Wheeler's response to homelessness, and said the city has become a cesspool. Quote, livability that once made Portland a unique and vibrant city is now replaced with human feces in business doorways, in our parks, and on our streets, according to Officer Daryl Turner. And he wrote this in a long post on Facebook. Aggressive panhandlers blocking the sidewalks, storefronts, and landmarks like Pioneer Square, discouraging people from enjoying our city. Garbage-filled RVs and vehicles are strewn across throughout our neighborhoods. Used needles, drug paraphernalia, and trash are common sights, lining the streets and sidewalks of the downtown core area under our bridges and freeway overpasses. That's not what our families, business owners, and tourists deserve. The union's statement comes in response to remarks that the mayor made to the Oregonian's editorial board last week, acknowledging that it's a problem that half of the arrests police made last year were of homeless people. We're just going to pause for a minute. And it is a serious issue of what the police have to deal with on a regular basis. And so we're hearing out what he has to say. There's a big divide between the police and the average citizen. Not all police have a heart for the homeless. And then there are some, right, whose time would be better served protecting the public than policing the homelessness problem. And so, this article is touching on that. There are policies that have been created. There are economic issues and realities that are out of these officers' hands. And yet they're tasked with policing the homeless. And yet there's like this double standard. And I understand what this officer is saying, what this union chief is saying. So they deal with a lot of crap, right? But the laws haven't changed. The affordable housing issue, right, hasn't improved. And so it's easy for those involved, people like Wheeler, to blame the police or something to that effect for policies and economic realities that the officers don't control. And so we need to be fixing this. None of us have all the answers. And to a certain degree, Portland is a magnet, but it's not just a magnet for homelessness. It's also been a magnet for a lot of money people have invested in Portland. It's a magnet for a whole lot of things. So when you have a city that's a magnet for a whole lot of things, well, a lot of things go with that, if you know what I mean. The alternative is to not be such a popular place where all different types of people want to be, to where the rents are so jacked up. I mean, this is a classic first world problem issue with affordable housing because of a extreme popularity in a region in a short period in time. And that plays a huge role in the homelessness problem. Of course, some people may have been drawn to maybe move to Portland because of the Portlandia mythos. But yes, these are things to keep in consideration. Also, it's difficult for the person that is without a home, right? It's already difficult enough. But especially when they're facing judgment and they're not polluting and their RVs are not filled with trash. So people like myself, for a period of time, I was mobile. And this 2014, 2015 period, even leading up to 2016 to where I am now, where I've been able to at least stop traveling from place to place, that's an experience I don't want to go back to. Because as the problem gets worse, instead of there being more compassion, hey, how do we fix the problem? How do we help some people help themselves? It's still a welfare state. And as Keith Davis calls it, or the individuals involved in making money off the homeless, he calls them poverty pimps. So there's this whole industry, and it really is an industry, that's all based on supposedly helping the homeless individuals, right? But you have a lot of middlemen and middle women working as caseworkers and all of these different elements I've talked about. Yes, it's great that they offer. Of course, in many cases, it's court mandated, but there's a lot of treatment centers in Portland, Oregon for a hardcore narcotics. So some people may end up there from Los Angeles. Some people may end up there from New York. Now, there's a lot of people coming from the big cities to Portland, Oregon. Wow, it's like paradise to them, even with the homeless problem, because it's not as expensive as the Bronx or Brooklyn or San Francisco, you see. And I've been noticing this. You know, I went to California briefly, and there was a direct correlation with a lot of homeless and even an outbreak of things like hepatitis and places where the rent is extremely high. You know, there's always going to be that correlation unless, of course, we end up in some sort of a dictatorship where the homeless are just outright banned, right? But they're still going to be there. And the higher the rent is, you know, there's going to be even more people in certain groups in places. Down in California, they even have vigilante groups where people are so upset that the homeless are being found on the beach. Somebody told me about this briefly. I remember being creeped out hearing about the group because they even went after people trying to expose the fact that some of their members of this anti-homelessness group, activist group, anti-homeless, against the homeless activist group of wealthy Southern California homeowners, there was reports about some homeless being beat up. So when we talk about the things that are going on in our society that need our attention, it includes the things that happen to people that are in the undesirable class. And we certainly have a caste system within our own nation. And so it's not an easy place to be. And there are people that are posing left and right, metaphorically and literally, in order to benefit financially by masquerading as people in office that want to fix the problem. And instead of the problem being fixed, we look at the problem over the course of decades and we see a industry. We see a world where, you know, if people want to get off the streets, that there's fingers pointing in the direction of treatment centers and beyond that, right? Applications for straight up welfare and all different types of individuals that, you know, are disabled, I guess. At least they are disabled according to the state. This is a system that promotes the welfare state while it is anti people living off the grid. And so it's important as people look at these problems getting worse, and we'll see where we'll be in the 2020s. Even still in 2018, there aren't in this article at all, there aren't real discussions about some of the real causes of homelessness that could be avoided. But this is still relevant information that we should cover. So let's go back. The union statement comes in response to remarks the mayor made to the Oregonian board last week. The newsroom published an analysis last month that showed homeless people accounted for 52% of arrests, while making up less than 3% of the population. So all this costs money, including the money that it costs the taxpayers to house them in jail and or prison if they end up doing something on the streets because of a lack of proper mental care, for example. I really resent also, I see them using the term off-grid in a negative sense, like he went off-grid, like he went crazy. So I am noticing some journalists using the term off-grid for going crazy. So it's just something I'm noticing there. Some people are trying to pop their eyes. Wheeler told the editorial board that people who are experiencing homelessness or who have mental health and addiction issues should interact less with police and more with social service providers. But he praised officers for trying to connect homeless people with services and said arrests are their last choice. It's a system where they want people to get in line, basically. And so they make it sound like the help is there. In fact, a couple of years ago, they made it sound like tiny homes are going to be a solution to the homelessness epidemic. Tiny homes are only a solution to being houseless when you have a place to put that tiny home. It sounds laughable and a little bit mean. They say you're going to do like a pilot project for like maybe 10 ladies, and then that's it. Like, oh, yeah, talk about tiny homes as a solution for the homelessness. The issue is where can people, in particular single men and people that don't have families, just survive and not be regulated out of existence. So there's a reason why people like myself have gone our own way, and we've left these urban places. I don't want to be too long-winded when I say it. There is a part of me, though, that does miss the old Portland. But, as I look at what's happening now and the controlled opposition in some cases on both sides, the fighting in the streets while you have a homelessness epidemic and sky-high rents. Who wants to be in that cesspool? So I agree with him wholeheartedly. But when we talk about cesspool, it's bigger than this, what he's describing. It's also that drunken, lustful, and I'm not trying to sound like some old school Christian trying to hit you over the head with the Bible. But there is something very dark about the Sin City reality that comes alive at night in the old town, Chinatown. All that money, they talked about all that money that they wanted to put into that district to revitalize Portland years ago. And what you really have, and you can learn this by studying, he doesn't do it as much anymore. Mike Smith, I wish you would. You and Robert West. But the stuff that they would film, the people spilling out of the nightclubs, the people screaming at each other. There was this one situation where this woman was spitting at officers and they put a bag over her head. Just like wild, crazy behavior worthy of a documentary. So just keep this, let's keep this in a context. When people talk about Portland, Oregon being a cesspool, this is just one element of that. What one could call a cesspool. You take a little bit closer of a look at that, the particular individuals that are filling up the Portland nightclubs in that part of town that are twerking the night away. Check out some of the stuff from Mike Blue Hair in 2014 and 15. But then you'll get an idea in HD on top of it. I mean, there is no Cops episode out there that even comes close to the work that he and Robert did, documented the wild nightlife. So that's what people observing Portland may not understand from observing it from the outside. Nor do I think that you hear people really talking about the real Portlandia from these articles, but you get clues, right? You get clues about the real Portlandia from reading these things. It's somebody like me that takes you outside the box, the normal way of looking at things. Oh, they're mentally ill. Well, what's causing all the mental illness? We talk about the mental illness in Portland, Oregon, or a major metropolitan area. What does that mean? No, just being homeless doesn't spell mentally ill. Oh, he became mentally ill, then he became homeless. See, we have some people that haven't suffered that much economically or with jobs or with rent or with roommates or family that they don't know what homelessness is. A lot of people have family. One part of my journey is I've been living a long time without family close to me. I have parents that are alive. They're not together, but that's another story. But I've lived many years, right, without family and proximity. So when I came upon economic hard times, and I would say by having a cable access show in Portland during a period in which people already were paranoid, and I dealt with that. I'm just telling you in brief, in case you're curious. A lot of people were concerned that my media activism would bring government heat on the household. Portland has a lot of activists, right? But also a lot of paranoid people. So somebody would think, well, you would think that Alex would have a lot of allies. Well, I'm not in the left-right paradigm. It's very dominant, like socialist, what they call anarchist, what they call progressive. Just like you have people that are very dominant and they're, you need to be with the manga or we're going to consider you the enemy. Like you have a lot of people in that same mindset on a different political note, but it's the same vibrational frequency of think like us or be an outsider. But there are some good things about Portland, Oregon. And I think of it like a fruit, right? That may attract flies and other pests or bugs, especially after it starts to become rotten. And the question is Portland becoming rotten? Well, certainly economically, certainly we look at politically, we see elements of rotten to the core, bad to the bone. When we look at the history of Portland, Oregon and its foundation, right? Off of the bones of the dying world, almost literally like the story of and the things Terrence McKenna has talked about, to quote him, living off the bones of the dying world. We look at the actual story of the foundation of Portland, Portlandia, dun, dun, dun. And you have human trafficking, you have degenerate debauchery, we have brothels in Old Town, Chinatown, and then you fast forward, right? And it's like, this is like an offshoot, all of this homelessness. And I don't want to get too metaphysical, but it's almost as if some of these souls, lost souls, they're trying to find themselves, are trying to find themselves in like a real life human pit of hell, where rent shouldn't cost $1,000 for a studio apartment. Where in my lifetime, I can remember that was like $350, $400. And you didn't need to have, in some cases, perfect credit. There was also the old world of renting where it was just cash, and you just gave your landlord cash. And you have to pay $50 for an application for something that you're probably going to fail anyways. Because of all these people that are in debt, most people can't pass. A lot of people can't pass the modern expectations for that the landlords want. And see, that's one of the things that really got me thinking about or living with roommates for years when I lived in Portland, Oregon, during the years in which it was realistic to have a part-time job or a full-time job and be able to rent a room. You don't have the privacy of having your own home, but you can share a room with some other freaks. Yeah, good luck with that. Sometimes it works. Most of the time, it's pretty awkward. But when you get to the point where that's almost too expensive and life's just about work, then the slave consciousness takes over. And I would say that person can change. And with all that electromagnetic pollution, right? Apathy to the real things that matter is just a heartbeat away. And there's a lot of people in Portland, Oregon that are fairly apathetic despite the protests that you see there. It's because of the high rents. It's because of the swanky element of the lifestyle of being a Portlander and not being in this class and not being in this caste. There's something that some humans from the big cities thrive on. That's why they like Portland, because they're in a position to benefit at the moment for the time being. While people are suffering, right? Even some people that are elderly that are literally from Portland, Oregon. You need to also consider the homeless of the future. Okay? That would be those individuals that aren't able to afford the increase in taxes, property taxes. Picture somebody that bought their home for tens of thousands of dollars in the 1970s, only to see the city expect that from them on an annual level in the form of taxes. Now their home is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the option that many people are facing and will face and have faced in Portland, right? The problem is when some people become so senile, they're not seeing it come. And hit them with a ton of bricks, hitting them like a ton of bricks. They need to be able to see it coming. A day where they may need to sell their home and migrate elsewhere to avoid a really bad situation where they end up defaulting on their property taxes and the city ends up taking it. I know somebody who had that happen to him. Sometimes people get distracted with other things. Sometimes it's an economic thing, but it's the increase in the amount of money that they want for the property that is a new cause of homelessness for some people. So going back to the article, you see, and they're placing blame. They're trying to place blame on each other instead of deal with the actual issue. The city's police oversight agency, the Independent Police Review, launched an investigation last week to examine how police interact with homeless people in response to the reporting from the Oregonian. In the police union statement, Turner said the police bureau is understaffed and unable to take needed time to connect homeless people with social services. As I was just saying to you, right? They're still on this very basic level of what solutions it's just a matter of getting them in line to wait for their name to be called in the application to be designated mentally disabled or to be given some sort of housing. And there are people that are literally on the streets for years waiting for housing. And I'm saying is for all those years that they're waiting for housing, I've said this in other videos, they could be doing something to make themselves some money. The city could be spending just a little bit of money for a facility to help them build something, help them stay off the drugs, stay off the alcohol. I've lived in Portland, Oregon. There's nothing for these people to do. Okay, we live in a society. I'm just going to stop right here and just give you the word up, okay? We live in a society that, we're going to care about the kids. We're going to build them a rec center and all this yada, yada. We have adults. We have older men that have been left behind by the modern world. Why? I'll show you why. And I've talked about it in many videos. It's the worship of, looks like the ads have changed here. Okay, the ads rotate. These are Google ads. But you'll notice in a lot of the ads, oh, here's an ad, and it's about constipation. Well, that's nice, but it does start with a pretty chick. Nothing wrong with being pretty, but sex is used to sell. When it becomes so gross and so obscene, so we had like a girl that was dancing. It was just like a stripper, but she's just, and it's switched to something else at the moment. It's like showing off the lingerie, and that's fine. But see, that's why we're a society that's out of balance, why you have so many men that are left behind. One of my most watched videos at the moment is good men being left behind. Repercussions for women's safety in the future. So when you have societies that become so out of balance, worshiping the ivory towers, thinking their cell phones, right, are going to be their primary protector, like, ooh, the state is my protector. And that what happens when the system goes down. And so it's interesting. This is why I'm going to keep reporting on Portland as long as I think I should, as long as I'm alive, as long as I'm on YouTube. But just because I moved out of Portland, this Babylonian city, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't turn our focus away from it. And I'm pretty sure that I'm one of the few that covers Portland in this way. And I think that that's something that anyone, if you're feeling drawn to it, if you're from Miami, then do it. If you're from New York, then do it. If I'm reminding you of Stockholm, Sweden, then on your YouTube channel, explain it, right? But it's best to talk about what you know. And these are streets that I know. These are individuals that I'm familiar with, right? Activists that I know of. Been watching certain channels for a period of time. Some people I knew. I also understand the vibes in that city. So I can really articulate like just the fall of almost this, at times I've called the city of the wounded goddess, really. Almost like this nature spirit fallen and then taken over and dominated by the world of man. You know what I mean? And it's like Dante's Inferno. And so you have all the main vices. You have human trafficking. You have drug addiction. You have drug running. You have extreme homelessness. You have other issues, alcoholism. That's why there's so many AA meetings. And it's like they're living on top of the bones of the dying world, without even acknowledging their own evils, their own social ills, where it comes from, right? You know, the connection with polluting the land while pretending you're all green and progressive because you didn't cut down all the trees. Yeah, but look at your river. It's like pumped full of sewer septic. Meanwhile, they're kicking people off their land if they don't have septic. Look at what the city's done for hundreds of years. They just pump it right back into the river. What me worry? Take another $1 billion from the taxpayers. Maybe you'll figure it out in 10 years. And if you look at like the history of the city of Portland trying to manage its sewer system, oh man, that is something to hold your nose to. You know what I mean? Funky. Billions of dollars. Just for what? For that? It pumps back into the... I mean, you can even make fuel out of that. And it's like people want to pretend like, oh, we're so progressive. Free energy. And it's like, okay, here we are in 2018. What are you doing with it? No, don't pump that back into the drinking water. Make some fuel out of that. Make some fertile... Grow some food somewhere on Salvi's Island. No. We'll just... So... This is just stuff that I want to share with you. So if you want to hear this in full, read this in full, we're gonna go over this. We are going to go over the full Facebook post, and that will conclude this video. All right, so this is what he had to say. Our city has become a cesspool. Livability that once made Portland a unique and vibrant city is now replaced with human feces in business doorways, in our parks, and on our streets. I feel like I need to have my movie voice on, like, in a world. Aggressive panhandlers block the sidewalks, storefronts, and landmarks like Pioneer Square, discouraging people from enjoying our city. Garbage-filled RVs and vehicles, we covered that, are strewn throughout our neighborhoods. Used needles and drug paraphernalia and trash are common sights lining the street and sidewalks of the downtown core area, under our bridges and freeway overpasses. That's not what our families, business owners, and tourists deserve. Look, I only have also so much patience for people that just whine incessantly, right? But there is a point that he's making, and we're going to cover that. All right. Mayor Wheeler's public policies have failed. He has failed us. Record tax revenues are being brought into the city, but what do we have to show for it? See, and that's something I want to highlight. I am incensed that once again the mayor has thrown Portland police officers under the bus instead of saying what we all know to be true, that his proposed solutions to our homelessness crisis have failed. What we need for our city and county leaders is to take responsibility for this crisis getting out of hand. They need to put forth actual solutions with actual results and stop throwing hard-earned taxpayer dollars down a black hole. You know, so I'm not being like all pro-cop or whatever by reading this. He makes good points because that is what the mayor of Portland's done. Well, acting like they care about the homeless. Well, they haven't changed policies to help them get into affordable housing or somewhere to where they can prevent their asses basically from being arrested. And so there was just a lot of money, right, that's gone into these black holes. He's alluding to that. I mean, we're talking about hardcore criminality potentially. I mean, you do have people that have been convicted of some pretty heinous crimes, like, trying to think of the particular individual, but friends of the city of Portland, Nick Fish, and yet he was arrested with a child, a 13-year-old child, and yet these are some of the individuals that have ties to the city of Portland. So we also have Ted Wheeler, and he was a part of that Top Off 4 drill that I've talked about on my channel, that drill that took place, right? Before he was the mayor, he was with the county of Multnomah, and somehow or another, he was working with the feds. He really looked like a Fed to me at the time. Current Mayor Wheeler. At the time, I'm not sure what his position was, but he was a part of this Top Off 4 contingency drill, that creepy drill that I've talked about so many times. So, I mean, behind the scenes, who is Mayor Ted Wheeler really? Is he someone that's been placed in power? Is this a Portland tradition that we really know nothing about? It kind of seems that way, at least speaking for at least the last 10 years or 15 years. It seems that they've had like these establishment individuals that have been bringing Portland along up to the modern world, the current socially engineered Portland that they are creating. And that's why it's traumatic for people that are actually from Portland. To see what the politicians have allowed to take place. And unfortunately, I may not agree with certain people on the right, but I understand their anger and where it comes from. They're angry at these policies, but they need to keep their anger in check sometimes because some of these policies have been deliberately allowed to get out of control. That's my take. And right now we have people fighting in the streets over politics, but they're not dealing with these issues, are they? They're not even discussing these issues. I always bring that up when I talk about the Proud Boys versus Antifa, that they're there fighting. They're not talking about these issues. And that's something that you need to be aware of. True to form, instead of standing up and leading, Wheeler has reverted to that. Is there some sort of profiling or implicit bias by the cops to smokescreen his own failed policies? And that's fair of that officer to bring up, right? Because there's a lot of blame put on the officers. And yet you have the mayor himself calling the police when he had protesters outside his home, when he had homeless activists that were sleeping on a sidewalk outside his home. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't recommend that, right? But he contributed to that arrest ratio, right? By calling the police on protesters outside his home. So you're not really dealing with a honorable Ted Wheeler, and you're not really dealing with a honorable mayor or city council. Then you're going to deal with, especially when they're taking millions from the people to supposedly fix the problem. Oh man, that's just going to make the problem worse. Not to mention, where's all that money going? And so they talk about the Portland police has not been given nearly enough resources to fulfill its small piece in addressing the homelessness crisis. He says, quote, "We are understaffed. Officers are unable to spend the time needed to connect our homeless to necessary services." You know, I'm just going to conclude. So when I was living briefly in my vehicle, I did not apply for services. I continued doing my program on cable access TV. I created a playlist series on my YouTube channel called The Real Portlandia. My AdSense began, ironically, during that period, just a few hundred a month, which is kind of what I'm struggling with right now. Actually, a lot less now, right? But during that period in which I was hitting the skids, the thing that kept me going and kept that period very brief, right? I stayed away from other people, really down and out. I realized there was some resentment towards some people because I had a media platform and a YouTube channel. And a lot of people didn't understand that, let alone agree with the things that I was saying. And so I felt that I was in that Babylonian type of experience, right, for a reason. I was meant to learn from it and really see what had become of my city, a city and a people and a government and a collective that says, well, if you want out of this situation, why don't you just apply for welfare or just keep trying to become a slave again, busting tables again, competing with the sea of workers coming up from fancier restaurants from LA and New York. Just get back in line, Alex. Just get back in line. And so for me, that experience of living in the canopy, but also a tiny home on wheels that I made with a friend at the time, and parking it, moving from place to place, it set me free from the Portlandia mythos that was the place for me. Some of these people are still suffering from a much deeper mental health crisis. They think that Portland is the place for them, and that is a very profound state of suffering. And I hope that the Creator brings them healing from that. But ultimately, a lot of these people are lost inside, and they have gravitated to the thorny Rose City. It would be nice to see a country, a society, an economy strong enough that could allow for people to escape such urban desperation. But this is a matter of cause and effect, and they can write their articles and they can point the blame, but they're still not dealing with, right, the current causes of homelessness. And how people can evolve beyond just living in squalor, right? With buckets of poo next to them in the streets. And adopting to what is natural to us, right? Living in these urban, like 5G concentrated environments where people are fighting in the streets over politics. That's no solution. And just saying that welfare and affordable housing in the city is a solution, is the only solution. That's not a solution either. That's a lie. So the first thing that people need to come across is the truth about what's really going on.